Imagine a country where women are so far ahead of men in development
Hmm.
that they actually rank #1 on Earth.
Right. Number one globally.
#1, above Norway, above Switzerland, above every Nordic utopia you usually associate with gender equality.
It sounds incredible on paper.
It does. But what if I told you that ranking isn't a symbol of triumph at all? What if that #1 spot is actually like the statistical footprint of a massive demographic tragedy?
Yeah, it's the ultimate paradox of data, really.
And that's exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. I want you, the listener, to picture the source material we're looking at today. We've got this meticulously crafted 15-slide academic data presentation.
And the aesthetic is just stark.
Very stark. Minimalist white backgrounds, sharp typography. And right there on the first slide, there is this giant, jarring, black #1.
With a hand-drawn red arrow pointing right at it.
Right, and a note asking, what is the truth behind the data? Because when you look at this source material, and we're talking about core data from the United Nations Development Program spanning 30 years, from 1990 to 2023.
30 years of data.
Yeah, you see a nation that seems to be living in two completely alternate realities at the same time. We are talking about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Over that 30-year span, the country's overall Global Human Development Index ranking just plummeted. It went from 32nd in the world all the way down to 90th.
Which is just a catastrophic relative drop in global standing.
Right. But then you turn the page on this presentation, and the data reveals that in 2023, its Gender Development Index defeated every single developed nation on the planet to claim that global #1 spot.
It's totally counterintuitive.
It's wild. So, okay, let's unpack this. Is this absolute gender advantage some unheralded victory for women? Or, are we looking at a metric that's masking a deep structural societal crisis?
Well, to solve that mystery, we really can't just look at a single number on a dashboard. We have to strip these metrics down to the studs.
Okay, so where do we start?
The presentation lays out an analytical framework using 4 dimensions from the UN data. First is the HDI, which is overall human development.
Got it.
Then the GDI, which compares female to male development. Then the IHDI, which adjusts those overall scores for internal societal inequality.
So, like how fair this society is.
Exactly. And finally, the PHDI, which actually penalizes a country for its environmental impact, its planetary pressures.
Okay, I want you listening right now to think about how often you scroll through the news or maybe look at a quarterly business report at work and you see a single ranking, #1 in the world or fastest growing.
You see that and you just assume it means outright success.
Instinctively, yes.
Hmm.
Unambiguous success. But today, we're challenging you to look beneath the surface of the dashboard. Because to understand how a country gets to #1 in gender development, we first have to understand the baseline.
Right. What actually happened to its overall human development over the last 3 decades?
Exactly. The presentation calls this the Great Divergence.
And this is where the timeline gets incredibly counterintuitive. Because, if you hear that a nation dropped from 32nd to 90th in the world over 30 years,
You assume total societal collapse.
right, you assume life expectancies plummeted, schools closed, the economy just evaporated into thin air.
That would definitely be my guess. Like, if you lose nearly 60 places on the global leaderboard, your raw numbers must have gone completely backward.
That is exactly what you'd expect, but the data tells a totally different story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ukraine's absolute HDI score, and this is the raw number calculating life expectancy, education, and per capita income, it actually crept up.
Wait, it went up.
It did. In 1990, it was 0.750. In 2023, it was 0.779.
Huh.
They did not go backward in absolute terms. Technically, on paper, the average standard of living improved slightly over those 30 years.
Okay, I'm confused. How do you improve your actual score but lose 60 places in the global rankings?
Because development doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens on a fiercely competitive global stage. So while Ukraine went from 0.750 to 0.779, the world's average HDI rose from 0.608 in 1990 to 0.756 in 2023.
Oh, wow. So the rest of the planet essentially sprinted and caught up to where Ukraine was 30 years ago.
Exactly. I mean, think about the period from 1990 to 2023. It was an unprecedented era of global development.
Right, the rapid industrialization of Southeast Asia.
The staggering economic ascent of China and India, plus a massive global expansion in medical access that lifted hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty, the world sprinted forward.
And Ukraine just stagnated.
It flatlined while the rest of the planet experienced a massive boom.
It makes me think of running on a treadmill at the gym. Like you're jogging at a steady, comfortable pace. You feel like you're doing fine.
But the treadmill itself is slowly, automatically speeding up.
Yes, because the global standard is rising. So you're still moving your legs. You're technically moving forward. But relative to the belt, you are getting pushed further and further to the back of the machine.
Until eventually you fall off.
Right. But how does a highly developed country just drop out of the globalization race like that?
Well, we have to look at the macroeconomic reality of the 1990s. When the Soviet Union dissolved, Ukraine inherited a massive, heavily industrialized economy. But it was an economy entirely integrated into a closed Soviet supply chain.
So when that system vanished overnight.
The transition to a free market economy was just brutal. We're talking hyperinflation, the really complex and often corrupt privatization of state assets, and the literal collapse of entire industrial sectors.
Let's put some numbers to that brutality, because the income data on slide 3 is just wild. In 1990, the data shows that gross national income per capita was quite high relative to the global average. It was sitting at roughly $23,600.
Right.
And just to clarify to the listener, that this is measured in purchasing power parity, or PPP. That just means we're adjusting the money to reflect what it actually costs to buy a loaf of bread or pay rent locally, right?
Exactly. So we can compare the true value of that income fairly against the rest of the world. It's a crucial adjustment. Because in 1990, the global average GNI per capita was only about $11,274.
Wow. So they were earning more than double the global average in 1990. They started this 30-year period from a position of massive relative economic strength.
They did. But by 1998, their GNI per capita had collapsed to about $9,594.
A drop from over $23,000 to under $10,000.
Right.
In less than a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't a recession. That's an economic vaporization.
It's literally a lost decade. And while the economy slowly recovered over the next 20 years, reaching back toward the 16,000 to 18,000 range in the late 2010s, that compounding growth that the rest of the world enjoyed, it just wasn't there.
So the essential takeaway from this baseline data is that progress is entirely relative. If you aren't growing at the global average, you are effectively in decline.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so we've established the grim reality of the baseline. The overall pie of human development stagnated while the world flew by, which makes the central anomaly of this presentation feel like a glitch in the matrix.
It really does.
If the country is falling behind globally, how on earth did it secure the #1 spot in gender development?
For that, we have to look at how the UN calculates the GDI, or Gender Development Index. It's explicitly designed to measure gender gaps in human development achievements.
Okay, so how does the math work?
It takes the HDI for women, so their life expectancy, their education, and their income, and divides it by the HDI for men. So a ratio of 1.0 means perfect mathematical equality between the sexes.
Got it. And the global average GDI in 2023 is 0.955, which tracks logically, right? It means female development slightly trails male development globally.
Precisely. It reflects the systemic inequalities, the wage gaps, the educational barriers we know exist for women worldwide. A global average of 0.955 is a reflection of structural disadvantage.
But we look at the data for Ukraine on slide 4. In 2023, its GDI isn't just 1.0, it is 1.038.
Which is astronomical.
#1 in the world.
What's fascinating here is that a GDI significantly over 1.0 is incredibly rare. The presentation actually highlights this visually. There's this dark gray shadow crossing the 1.0 baseline, and it's annotated as a Tier 1 extreme anomaly.
Tier 1 extreme anomaly.
Because mathematically, it indicates that female development is significantly higher than male development.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you first see that 1.038, your instinct is to celebrate. You think, wow, the women in this country have just completely out-innovated and out-learned the rest of the world.
Right, they shattered the glass ceiling, climbed out, and built a new floor above the men.
Exactly. So is that what happened here? Did female development just skyrocket independently of the stagnant economy?
This is the crucial reveal of the data, and it is a deeply tragic one. The #1 ranking is an illusion.
An illusion.
It is not driven by some unprecedented utopian surge in female prosperity. It's actually driven by a catastrophic, multi-generational drop in male health and survival.
Oh, the presentation calls it the fatal gap on slide 5.
Because it is fatal. We have to look at the foundational pillar of the Human Development Index, which is life expectancy at birth. This is the bedrock of everything else. I mean, if you aren't alive, you can't accumulate years of schooling.
And you certainly can't earn an income.
Exactly.
Let's anchor this with the global data first. In 2023, the global life expectancy for women was roughly 75.9 years. And for men, globally, it was 70.99 years.
So biology and sociology give us a natural global gap of about 4.9 years.
Right. Women generally outlive men worldwide by roughly 5 years.
Now look at the data for Ukraine. In 2023, female life expectancy is 80.19 years.
Okay, so that's a solid, highly developed number. It exceeds the global average for women.
It does. But male life expectancy in Ukraine is only 66.90 years.
66.90. That is, honestly, that's hard to process.
It creates a 13.3-year survival chasm between men and women. The presentation illustrates this with 2 parallel area charts, and it fills this massive space between the male and female trend lines with a semi-transparent red shadow.
A 13.3-year gap. I want to ask you to visualize what a gap like that actually looks like on a human level. Think about walking through a neighborhood or looking at the demographics of a city.
It changes everything.
It means that for over a decade of late life, the male population essentially vanishes. You have entire generations of men missing from the upper age brackets. It creates a society of widows.
Yeah, it completely reshapes family structures. It alters the burden of elder care.
And it has to profoundly impact the psychology of the culture, too.
Absolutely. And if we trace this back through the source data, this isn't a sudden phenomenon caused solely by recent geopolitical events. In 1990, male life expectancy in Ukraine was 65.3 years.
Okay.
During the extreme economic turmoil of the mid-90s, that lost decade we discussed earlier, it actually plummeted into the low 60s. It hit 61.5 in 1996.
Wow, dropping into the low 60s for men.
It took until 2010 just to claw back to 65. And by 2023, it's only at 66.9. Meanwhile, female life expectancy steadily climbed from the low 70s in the 90s to over 80 today.
So mechanically, when the GDI formula takes the female HDI and divides it by the male HDI,
that massive deficit in male health drags the male denominator way, way down.
which artificially inflates the final ratio above 1.0.
Exactly. The #1 rank isn't a victory of female empowerment. It's a structural pathology. It represents a severe chronic health crisis among the male population.
What's driving that mortality rate?
We are looking at a demographic ravaged by cardiovascular disease, the profound stress of economic dislocation, higher rates of occupational hazards in heavy industry, and, historically, a significant lack of preventative healthcare utilization among men during times of societal transition.
The slide calls this a downward convergence.
Yes. The ratio looks great, but is built on male mortality, not female prosperity.
That completely flips the script on how we consume data. It's such a powerful lesson in why we can never just take an index ranking at face value.
You really can't.
Because a perfect score of 1.0 should mean everyone is thriving equally. Here, a score of over 1.0 means 1/2 of the population is experiencing a multi-decade health crisis.
And this realization forces us to look much closer at the other 2 pillars of the Development Index: education and income.
Right, because if women are outliving men by 13 years, they have a massive, undeniable advantage in the health metric.
So the logical next question is, what does the data show about their actual empowerment in the economy? Are they translating those extra 13 years of life into wealth, leadership, and economic dominance?
Which brings us to slides 6 and 7, the concept of the human capital paradox, or what the presentation frames as knowledge versus the glass ceiling. Let's look at education first, which the data labels the knowledge shield.
And the numbers here are genuinely impressive.
They really are. In 2023, Ukrainian women have an expected 13.54 years of schooling.
Which is exceptionally high. Just for context, the global average for expected years of schooling for women is 13.04, so they are well above the global average.
And crucially, they are also above Ukrainian men.
Right, who have an expected 13.12 years of schooling.
And even if we look at the actual average years of education received by adults 25 and older, Ukrainian women are at 11.42 years, while men are at 10.73.
So no matter what metric you use, the women in this demographic are highly educated. They possess immense human capital.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture.
Well, classical macroeconomic theory dictates that human capital, meaning your health and your education, should directly correlate with income.
That makes perfect sense. If you live 13 years longer and you possess more advanced degrees, you should inherently have a higher earning potential over your lifetime.
Right. You have more time to spend in the workforce, you have higher technical skills to offer the market, you should be generating more wealth.
But the data immediately shatters this assumption. They call it the income paradox. Let's look at the gross national income per capita for 2023 on slide 7. We know women have the health advantage. We know they have the education advantage.
Yeah.
But female GNI per capita is just $13,295.
Yeah.
Male GNI per capita is $21,119.
The visual presentation contrasts beautifully. It draws a thick black line connecting the female educational dominance directly down to their severe income deficit.
So despite their overwhelming advantages in the first two pillars of development, women earn roughly 63% of what men do.
Exactly. The high human capital is completely disjointed from market compensation.
I have to pause here because logically my brain is rejecting this.
It's hard to reconcile.
If I'm looking at this purely as a market dynamic, it makes zero sense. If the men are experiencing a massive health crisis, literally dying 13 years earlier, and they have fewer years of schooling on average, shouldn't these highly educated women be naturally filling the high-income economic vacuums?
You would think so.
I mean, if the male competition is missing from the demographic pool, why aren't the women the CEOs, the senior partners, the top earners?
That is the exact tension this data exposes. And the answer lies in the deep, systemic gender segregation of the labor market. High education does not automatically dismantle structural economic barriers.
What do you mean by gender segregation in the labor market?
What we are observing in this economic profile is a phenomenon where highly educated women are heavily clustered into specific sectors. Overwhelmingly, they are in education, healthcare, and public administration.
The public sector.
Yes. These sectors are socially vital, which is why they require high levels of education, but they are historically undervalued and chronically underpaid by the market. This is particularly true in post-Soviet economies where the state budget has been constrained for decades.
So to humanize this, imagine a woman named Elena living in Kiev. She has a master's degree, she's a highly skilled pediatric nurse or a high school physics teacher.
Right.
She has outlived her husband by a decade. But because her salary, and eventually her pension, is tied to a chronically underfunded public sector, she is struggling to afford basic utilities.
Meanwhile, the remaining male workforce is clustered in heavy industry, engineering, IT, or private enterprise.
Sectors that the market actually rewards with high capital.
Precisely. And furthermore, a 13-year life expectancy gap often means women spend a significant portion of their extended lives outside the primary wealth-generating years. They rely on pensions derived from those lower lifetime earnings.
So their lifetime wealth accumulation is severely curtailed by this 63% wage gap, despite their longevity.
The market simply refuses to reward their human capital.
It's like building a massive pressure cooker without a release valve. The state and the society are building all this immense human capital, high education, long life, which creates incredible potential energy.
But the structural barriers, the gendered labor segregation, they act as a sealed lid.
Exactly. The kinetic energy, the actual translation of that potential into wealth and economic power is completely blocked.
Which leads us to a very dark but entirely logical economic consequence on slide 8.
The vanishing workforce.
Right. Because if you are a highly educated woman and the formal market refuses to pay you what your human capital is worth, what is your next rational step? Do you just keep working for pennies?
No. If the market doesn't value me, I'm out. I vote with my feet.
Exactly. And the data shows a massive exodus from the formal economy. We have to look at the labor force participation rate or the LFPR.
This metric measures the proportion of the working age population that is actively engaged in the labor market, either working or actively looking for work, right?
Correct. In 1995, the female labor force participation rate in Ukraine was 64.9%. By 2023, it had plummeted to just 47.41%.
Wow. That is a staggering contraction. We are talking about millions of highly educated women disappearing from the formal workforce.
It is. Now, to be fair to the data, male labor force participation also dropped significantly in that same period. It went from 73.06% in 1995 to 62.32% in 2023.
So the economic volatility hit everyone.
It did. But that female drop to 47.41% is deeply alarming, especially when you contextualize it globally.
What's the global average?
The global average for female labor force participation currently hovers around 49%.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So Ukraine, despite having women with significantly higher than average education and life expectancy, has a workforce participation rate that has actually fallen below the global average.
So where does all that human capital go? I mean, what happens to a macroeconomic system when half its most educated populace stops formally working?
Well, it doesn't mean they stop working entirely. It means they are absorbed by the invisible economy.
The informal sector.
Right. When formal employment opportunities dry up and the available jobs systematically underpay women due to that 53% wage gap, the incentive to participate in the formal, taxable labor market vanishes. Women are pushed into the informal economy, working without contracts or benefits.
They probably take on disproportionate amounts of unpaid care work, too.
Absolutely, especially caring for the aging population in a country with a 13-year life expectancy gap. Or, crucially, they become part of a massive demographic brain drain. They migrate to foreign economies that will actually compensate them fairly for their degrees. So what does this all mean? Let me synthesize the sheer macroeconomic frustration here. You have an army of highly educated, long-living women. They possess the exact human capital a developing nation desperately needs to grow.
Yep.
But they are financially undervalued, earning only 63 cents to the male dollar. So naturally, they drop out of the formal workforce in massive numbers. It's an astronomical waste of human resources.
It's the textbook definition of inefficient resource allocation. It is a structural failure to harness the demographic dividend.
And what about their ability to change these rules? If the economic system is failing them, are they gaining power in the political system to rewrite the laws, to demand pay equity or better funding for the public sector?
We can look at the data for political empowerment on slide 9, specifically the percentage of parliament seats held by women. This is a core metric in the Gender Inequality Index.
Okay, let's look at the numbers. In 1990, women held just 3.7% of the seats in parliament.
Very low.
Yeah. Over the next 30 years, that number did rise, reaching 20.43% by 2023.
Now, a rise from nearly 4% to 20% is absolute progress. It shows a slow generational climb to power. However, we must again look at the relative global context.
Right, because the global average for female representation in parliament in 2023 was 26.54%. So even with that domestic growth, they are still trailing the global average.
This creates a compounding effect of marginalization. They have the knowledge and they have the longevity, but they lack the economic capital to exert market influence.
And they lack proportional representation in government to exert legislative influence.
Exactly. Their voices are systematically diluted in the halls of power, where the structural changes to the economy would actually be debated and enacted.
It's a really bleak picture we've painted so far. The #1 GDI ranking is a mirage built on dying men, and the highly educated women are underpaid, underrepresented, and leaving the formal workforce.
It sounds dire.
If we stop the analysis right here, you'd think the entire state apparatus had completely failed. You'd think there was no social contract left at all.
But the source material demands we look closer.
Right, because the data on slide 10 reveals some incredible hidden successes. The state hasn't failed its women completely. We have to look at the baseline social safety nets.
This is where the complexity of post-Soviet transitions really becomes apparent in the data. Because while the market mechanisms, income generation, and formal employment show deep structural flaws, the foundational social infrastructure tells a story of remarkable resilience and progress.
Let's look at maternal health. The progress here is genuinely staggering, almost hard to believe given the economic context we just laid out.
It really is. Let's look at the adolescent birth rate, which measures births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
It dropped from 59.2 in 1990 all the way down to 11.37 in 2023.
To put that in perspective, the global average adolescent birth rate is currently 39.07. So Ukraine's rate is exceptionally low. It far outperforms the global average. This indicates strong, widespread access to reproductive education and family planning, which are absolute hallmarks of high female empowerment in the public health sector.
And it gets better. Maternal mortality, the number of women dying per 100,000 live births, dropped from 45.3 in 1990 down to 16.5 in 2023.
What this tells us is that despite the extreme economic volatility, the hyperinflation of the 90s, the drop in overall GNI, and the crisis in male life expectancy.
The basic health systems required to protect mothers remained incredibly robust.
Exactly. The state, no matter how financially strained, maintained a baseline of maternal care. This points to the legacy of a highly egalitarian social structure that prioritizes baseline public health and child welfare, even when the broader macroeconomic engine sputters.
And this egalitarian legacy shows up in another really wonky but incredibly important metric we need to explore on slide 11, the inequality-adjusted HDI, or IHDI.
So the IHDI it's actually a pretty brilliant metric because it asks a really simple probing question, like how much of a country's potential human development is just lost because of internal inequality?
Right, because an average can hide a lot of extremes.
Exactly. If a country is, say, incredibly rich, but all that wealth and all the best hospitals and top universities are hoarded by the top 1%.
And everyone else gets nothing.
Right, then the IHDI will show a massive loss compared to the raw, unadjusted score.
Okay, so our data shows that in 2023, the global HDI loss due to inequality is a massive 21.95%, meaning globally, humanity loses over a fifth of its developmental potential simply because resources are distributed unfairly.
But look at Ukraine's loss.
Only 8.21%.
That is an extraordinarily low inequality loss. It
Okay.
means that whatever human development exists in the country, the education system, the healthcare infrastructure, it is distributed incredibly evenly across the entire population.
To visualize this, it's like having a municipal water system instead of relying on private wells. The overall water pressure in the city might be low because the main pump is old. That's the stagnant overall HDI.
Right.
But the plumbing is connected to every single house. Every single person still gets water. You don't have entire neighborhoods dying of thirst while a gated community next door has an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
That's a great analogy. The distribution of basic health and education resources remains equitable.
It creates a fascinating paradox within a paradox.
Yeah.
You have severe gender wage inequality in the labor market, yet broad societal equality in access to basic human development.
It points to a society that ensures everyone gets a baseline level of care and schooling, the municipal water system, as you said, but fails to provide a dynamic market to reward that baseline with high income.
It is what economists call a low-level equilibrium. The resources are fairly shared, but the total pool of resources is highly constrained.
Speaking of constrained resources and low-level equilibrium, let's look at another metric on slide 12 and 13. One that looks absolutely fantastic on paper but hides a much darker reality. Let's talk about the green illusion.
Okay, the green illusion. The UNDP recently introduced a new metric called the PHDI, or Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI. It adjusts a country's development score based on its environmental impact.
Specifically looking at carbon dioxide emissions and material footprint. The ethical idea behind it is to penalize countries that achieve high human development by destroying the planet and reward those that grow sustainably.
If we look at the data for Ukraine's environmental impact, it is phenomenal. CO2 emissions per capita fell off a cliff. In 1990, they were emitting 13.6 tons per capita. By 2023, that plummeted to just 3.71 tons.
While the world average, meanwhile, rose from 4.1 tons to 4.53 tons.
And the material footprint, the amount of raw materials extracted from the earth to meet domestic consumption, that dropped to 9.9 tons, well below the global average of 12.71.
It looks incredible.
So let me play devil's advocate here. Look at these numbers. They decarbonized. Their planetary pressure-adjusted HDI looks amazing. Did they receive a massive EU green energy grant? Are there vast arrays of wind farms and solar panels driving a new circular green economy?
This raises an important question about causality and data analysis. We have to ask why emissions dropped so precipitously. And the answer is no. There was no miraculous green technology revolution in the 1990s.
So what happened?
The presentation dismantles this green illusion brutally. The massive drop in CO2 emissions and material footprint was not a managed, intentional transition to renewable energy. It was a deindustrialization shock.
No, the factory's closed.
Exactly. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine's massive, highly polluting, energy-intensive, heavy industry sector basically collapsed.
Yeah.
Picture vast steel mills shutting down, coal mines closing, heavy manufacturing grinding to a halt.
Oh, wow. So the environmental pressure decreased solely because domestic demand, consumption, and industrial output contracted severely.
Yes. The visual data explicitly covers the 1990 to 2000 period with a red shadow labeled deindustrialization shock.
So they didn't get greener because they got smarter. They got greener because they got poorer. It is forced low-carbon living born of economic contraction.
It perfectly mirrors the GDI paradox we started with. Just as the #1 ranking in gender equality was driven by the tragedy of male mortality, the apparent triumph in environmental sustainability is driven by the tragedy of industrial collapse.
The metric looks incredibly successful on a dashboard, but the underlying human reality is one of severe economic hardship.
Right. The material footprint is low simply because people have less purchasing power to consume materials.
It is a profound warning about how we interpret sustainability metrics globally. I mean, if your carbon emissions drop because your economy fails, that is not a model for the world to follow. It's a symptom of macroeconomic distress.
It really forces you to question the ethics of a metric that inherently rewards poverty.
And this brings all the disparate threads of this 15-slide presentation together. We have to synthesize everything we've uncovered to resolve the central paradox. Let's pull it all together on slide 14.
The source material uses a 4-quadrant model to synthesize this into what it calls a structural pathology. Let's do a rapid-fire summary of how this all connects.
Okay, let's do it.
Point 1, the headline. The #1 GDI ranking globally is an illusion. It is a mathematical artifact built on a fatal crisis, a 13.3-year life expectancy gap driven by severe male mortality.
Point 2, the asset mismatch. Women have exceptionally high human capital, they live longer and are highly educated, but they are trapped under a structural glass ceiling, earning 63% of what men earn, which drives them to abandon the formal workforce in massive numbers.
Point 3, the hidden successes. The society is surprisingly equitable in its baseline distribution of health and education. Inequality is incredibly low, and maternal health is remarkably strong. The municipal water system works for everyone.
Point 4, the green illusion. The environmental metrics look spectacular, but only because heavy industry collapsed. It is a low-level equilibrium. Everything is fairly shared, but the overall pie is shrinking.
The entire dataset forces us, as analysts and as citizens, to deeply reconsider what development actually means. We cannot look at metrics in isolation. We cannot worship a ratio.
And that is exactly what I want to ask you, the listener, to think about right now. Think about the dashboards and the metrics you use in your own life or in your business, or when you are evaluating politics or society.
Are you looking at a single number, a single ranking, and blindly assuming success?
Are you celebrating a narrowed gap, a parity, or an equality metric without stopping to ask how that gap was closed? Are you cheering because the bottom performers came up, or are you cheering because the top performers fell down?
The academic presentation concludes on slide 15 with a powerful singular thought, and it serves as a warning for the global community.
What does it say?
True gender equality should be the shared upward prosperity of both sexes, not a downward convergence.
Not a downward convergence. If our ultimate goal, our holy grail, is just a statistical 1.0 on a spreadsheet, are we willing to accept a world where equality is achieved not by lifting everyone up to a higher standard of living, but by letting everyone fall to the same low baseline?
That's the real danger.
What happens when the metrics we use to measure human progress actually become a mask that hides human suffering?
It means we must always look past the dashboard. We must always demand the historical, economic, and human context behind the math.
Because sometimes the most celebrated #1 ranking in the world isn't telling you a story of triumph, it's telling you a story of survival. Keep looking beneath the surface and keep asking the hard questions.